Hello, I'm Father Jon Vander Ploeg. I'm the Director of Spiritual Formation at the Saint Paul Seminary. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit today about temptation and sin. So temptation, often we can feel guilty about being tempted, but temptation itself is not a sin. It's more like a fork in the road where we either grow closer to the Lord or further from the Lord. This is why St. Teresa of Avila would say that when we're tempted, that a saint would no longer be often tempted to sin by the enemy, but they try and deceive them. Because every time they're tempted and they say no, they actually grow in holiness, they grow closer to God. And sin is something that is where we choose against God. And sin is an offense against God, and it's also an offense against reason. So we can at times have a false view of sin, that it's something reasonable that God doesn't want me to do. But actually it's an offense against reason. So sin actually does not add anything to our lives, but it actually takes from us. And with regard to sin, sometimes we can develop a habit that's sinful, where we slide into the same pattern over and over and over. And this can get quite discouraging. And habitual sin can kind of lessen our freedom, where I'm not as free to respond. But at times I can cooperate with even forming that habit of sin, that I put myself in the near occasion of sin, or I have a divided heart, which often we do with sin, where I both love it and I hate it. So St. Francis de Sales talks about kind of putting before the Lord and rooting out an affection for sin, that the way I love things that are false can be problematic. In the Church's tradition, there's a clear distinction between what's called mortal sin and venial sin. And mortal sin has three parts to it. It would be serious matter, so it has to be serious enough. If I steal one number 2 pencil, the matter probably isn't going to be serious enough to kind of separate my relationship with God on that level of mortal sin. But obviously we want to avoid venial sins, smaller sins as well. So serious matter is a first part of that. A second part of mortal sin is that I know it's wrong. And there can be a couple aspects of this knowing that it's wrong. One, sometimes I'll hear people read something in a book and say, I never knew I was committing a mortal sin. And if I don't know it, it's likely serious sin, but not a mortal sin. There can also be a way of trying not to know something. So I've heard people say like, I know I could look this up in the catechism and it would probably take me 2 minutes, but I actually don't want to know if it's wrong or not. That's a different kind of choosing to not know. So that's different. That's where I could very easily know, but I'm choosing not to know. Where we should actually look to have our conscience formed, that I get truth, I get kind of light on it that's not just from myself. And thirdly, I have to have freedom in choosing it. So when I don't have freedom in choosing a sin, the guilt lessens, the culpability, often it's called, that my guilt for this sin is less. One thing that's important for us to look at in the battle of sin is that we're in a relationship with the living God. And it's actually a relationship of love. So what do I love? That sometimes the battle for sin, what we make a mistake in, is I try and just eliminate things. But actually, I have to be filled with someone. That I want the love of God and the virtue, the grace, the good things of Him to fill more and more of my life. So when I'm battling sin, one thing to ask is not simply what do I want to stop doing, but also what do I want to grow in love with? What can I be drawn to replace that? And another place to look at is how I fight. That often how I fight is just to clench my teeth and try and will something, and that often doesn't work real well. That two of the wisest things we can do is figure out where the battleground actually is. That if the battleground's in the imagination, then doing something like good reading something like The Lord of the Rings or a good mystery that actually heals the imagination or can bring freedom can be a great gift. And the other can be avoiding the near occasion of sin. That, for example, when I was growing up and my mom made cookies and they smell really good and she says, don't eat the cookies, they're for after dinner. It helps a lot more if I go outside and play than if I stand in the kitchen and look at the cookies and smell the cookies and tell myself, don't eat the cookies. That when I put myself in easy proximity to sin, it makes it much more difficult. So I would encourage all of us, even just start by asking for the intercession of the help of the Holy Spirit, the intercession of Mary and the saints, the angels, to help me actually see not only what sins need to come to light, but also what love does the Lord want to put in place of that sin, and ask for that gift to walk in His love, His truth, knowing that this brings us to deeper freedom and peace in Him.